intuition is real. Today we know it's real. We don't understand how it works, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't work. You don't have to know how intuition works. I think the science will eventually catch up. Nassim Haramein, the physicist, said, spirituality is nothing more than physics that we have not found a mathematical equation for yet.
Yes.
But intuition is real, and I use it every day in my life.
What's up, guys? I'm Helene Clabecq and you're watching a new episode of Life Disrupted. I met Vishen Lakhiani about a month ago at his event at Mindvalley University, and today we're interviewing him about, of course, awakenings, disruptions, his journey, and the reason why he wants to take humanity to a new level of unity and consciousness. Let's go. Vishen, I'm really interested in the disruptive parts of people's lives who have decided to, go against the grain basically and live in alignment. And I know that when you started to look into meditation, you had some sort of awakening that transformed you. Could you tell me more about that moment in your life?
So I moved to Silicon Valley in 2001, and my timing sucked because the dot-com bubble burst and people were being laid off all across San Francisco. So I had an idea as an engineer to create a startup. Obviously, the idea didn't take off. Obviously, there was no money. And all of a sudden, I found myself completely broke. I'd burned through money that I borrowed from my father. I had a beat-up car, which I couldn't afford to fix, which I got into a car crash, and now I was in debt. I owed $6,000 to the insurance company. Lost my apartment because I couldn't pay rent. So I found myself with this broken car, renting a sofa, just like this, but smaller and not as luxurious, from a college kid in Berkeley. My whole life felt like a failure. And so it wasn't just me. It was the height of the dot-com bubble bursting. 14,000 people were laid off in Silicon Valley in April 2001. And I remember you were just keeping your fingers crossed that you could get a job. So I was sending my resume out to everyone I could find on Craigslist. And finally I got a job. And it was a company in San Francisco, and what I had to do was pick up the phone and call lawyers and sell them on technology. Now, the economy was so bad that the company said, you don't get paid. You only get paid if you close a sale. Now, I was an engineer. I didn't know anything about sales. And so I had this awful job of picking up the phone and calling lawyer after lawyer after lawyer. And if you're disturbing American lawyers in the middle of their busy day, you're going to hear more fuck yous than you ever imagine.
Is that how you learn to face rejection for the first time?
You learn so much about facing rejection. I remember asking myself, am I really smart? Do I really deserve this? Can I really succeed? I felt like a failure. I had my fancy computer engineering degree, but I felt like a failure. I felt like I had no idea when this miserable life was going to pass by and I would at least get a break. Now back then, I remember getting on Google and I started to search for hope. This was when Google was a very new search engine. Maybe it was like 2 or 3 years old at that time. And I can't remember what I put into Google. Maybe it was, why does life suck so bad? Maybe it was, help me. But I found a class on meditation. So I flew to LA to take that class. And I was the only student who showed up.
So I have a question though, before you continue. What led you to Googling that sentence online? Did you have something specific happen to you?
I don't know.
You felt like that's enough?
I don't know. I was just looking for any hope, any answer that could get me out of that predicament. Because I was barely earning enough to lead a different life. Like I just wanted to be able to afford car insurance, to fix the dents on my car. I just wanted to get a decent apartment. And life just seemed so hard. And so, found this class on meditation, and there I learned to go within. I learned to listen to the voice within. This class was focused on intuition and meditation, listening to your inner voice. Now, I got back from the class, and Monday came. Now, back in San Francisco, back then when I worked for this company, we had to go to the San Francisco Public Library, check out the yellow pages. Now, the yellow pages, you know what that is?
Yeah.
The phone book, right? Nobody uses it anymore, but back then in 2002, people still did. So I had to check out the yellow pages. My territory was San Antonio, Texas, and I had to call every lawyer from A to Z. We had to go with the AAs, then the AAB, then the ACs, and so on. But after this class, I learned a new technique. I could open the yellow pages and I could meditate and run my hand down the yellow pages and get an impulse on who to call. And I would feel intuitively who to call. I would tell my mind, give me a sign if calling this lawyer would create a situation where our product would be the thing that the lawyer needs, and we could create a win-win relationship with this law firm.
So what's interesting here is that you reached out to this meditation course originally because you wanted to feel better, but then you realized that using that for
I could apply it to work.
Could also help you get out of that situation and improve your life.
Right. I just wanted to learn meditation so I wouldn't feel so sad and I wouldn't feel like a loser. But what I found is that meditation is so much bigger than what we expect, and you can apply it to work. And so instantly that week, so Sunday I got back from the class, Monday I started with this approach. By Friday I had doubled my sales. And then a month later, I doubled it again. A month later, I doubled it again. I ended up being promoted 3 times in 4 months. At 26, I was made director of sales. The company sent me to New York to start their entire New York office. And that is how I got super passionate about meditation. I stayed with that company for 18 months. And as I got deeper and deeper into personal growth, new abilities, new superpowers would unlock. Soon I was director of sales, and I was heading the company's business development division. I was holding 2 jobs simultaneously because I was so effective at what I did. I could do the jobs of 2 executive level people in 1 day. And then I felt a push to do something bigger. I wanted to do something that could change the world. And I remembered Mandela said, if you want to change the world, change education. And I thought, well, what could I look at in education? My mom was a teacher, a public school teacher, so I've always been fascinated with education. And I thought, meditation. I remembered that I was the only person who showed up in that class. Could I help bring these ideas mainstream? Could I help more people recover from the dip that I was in? And that's how Mindvalley started.
So how did you feel at the time with your engineering background? After having experienced like a spiritual journey, figuring out that your intuition is a thing without being able to explain it in any other way that through your heart.
As a man of science, my degree is electrical engineering and computer science. I love science. I want to see scientific data on things. I'm very well aware that human beings fall prey to superstition, to magical thinking, to fake news, to false ideology. So I want to see the data, I want to see the evidence. Now the fact is, for intuition, there is overwhelming data that intuition works. For example, the University of Edinburgh did a very famous study called the Gansfield Test Studies. And what they would do is they would take people and put them in a sensory deprivation chamber. Now, in the other room, there would be someone called a sender. And the sender would be shown 1 of 4 images on video, looping. It might be horses running through a stream. It might be a temple in the mountains. It might be a battle scene of war. It might be waves crashing on a cliff. Now, the person who was meditating would then be brought out of their meditation, and they would be shown the 4 images, and they would be asked which image was the sender watching and sending you. Now, if there was no such thing as intuition, what would be the probability that the receivers would guess the correct image out of 4? 25%. In actuality, what the University of Edinburgh found was that it was 33%. They couldn't explain how it was beyond the odds of probability. And the conclusion was that intuition exists. 1 billion to 1, intuition is real. Nobody is saying that you're going to guess correctly every single time. And even with the lawyers, I didn't have to guess correctly every single time, but I could guess correctly enough that I could double my sales. So you go from 25 to 33%. Now that's 7%, right? 8%. But that has a huge impact in life. If you can be 8% better at picking stocks, if you can be 8% better at finding the best idea, if you can be 8% better at knowing who to close a phone call, for sales,
Yeah.
you're going to see a multiplier effect in anything you do. So let's talk about the studies. There's another study. Now, I started looking into all of this way back in 2003. There's another study by Professor John Michalowski of the Newark College of Engineering. He looked at CEOs, and he made CEOs do an intuition test. And he found that there was a direct correlation. CEOs who score high in intuition have higher profitability in their business. A direct correlation. He wrote a book about it called Executive ESP. Intuition is real. Today we know it's real. We don't understand how it works, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't work. There are lots of things that we don't understand, but we still get to use. The average person can't figure out how an iPhone works, but it doesn't mean you cannot use an iPhone.
Yeah.
You don't have to know how intuition works. I think the science will eventually catch up. Nassim Haramein, the physicist, said, spirituality is nothing more than physics that we have not found a mathematical equation for yet.
Yes.
But intuition is real, and I use it every day in my life.
Do you have other examples of ways you tested your intuition back then to make sure it's a real thing?
Well,
Other
why
than
would I need to
business?
test it? I already have the evidence. My sales were doubling. I was crushing deals. I was doing the work of 2 people. But let me tell you, it wasn't just intuition. It was intuition combined with the ability to shift reality. Reality is an illusion, and reality is malleable. And I openly talk about the fact that you can influence synchronicities, you can create coincidences. We can do this. Reality is not static at all. Intuition is one aspect that I think companies are going to start looking at deeper.
For sure.
The second aspect is going to be the concept of bending reality. Luck can be generated.
Why do you think that most people don't see that?
I think people are opening their eyes to it. I think the understanding out there is still very basic.
Yeah.
So when people think about shifting reality, they think about simplistic ideas like the law of attraction. There's
Right.
definitely some truth in that, but it's basic. I've interviewed hundreds of people, Mindvalley publishers, hundreds of speakers, hundreds of the world's best authors, and I look at what they are saying. I look at their advice. I've interviewed billionaires, the saints, the spiritual teachers, and there's a formula. And that's something that I'm working on. I want to shift and bend reality to make life as beautiful as it can be. And that is a spiritual practice. And I'm not the only one who's talking about it. A lot of the great minds in the world spoke about ideas
Yes.
like that. Tesla, Einstein spoke about intuition. Steve Jobs spoke about not just intuition, but the idea of the world being an illusion. In fact, the word bend reality is used 3 times in Steve Jobs' autobiography by Walter Isaacson.
Interesting.
3 times.